Welcome to another edition of the Mailbag from the workshop this time, and we've got a fair few comments to get through. But before we get through those today, normal parish notices. So, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, why not? Hit the subscribe icon. If you want to be notified when this sort of content or other content hits the channel, that's the bell icon is the one you should be hitting. If you like the content of this video or any other video you watch on the channel, give it a thumbs up. It really helps. Become a member of the TMTG community. The address is down there, as are the Instagram and Facebook pages, or Instagram and Facebook pages, whichever way around it is. Go over there. You'll see all the shenanigans of the channel are notified on those platforms. But now back to the video. Do you know what? I've just on the previous question I just answered, I mentioned Genesis, and now I've got a Genesis song bouncing around my head. But there you go. I like Genesis. I love Genesis. Can't wait for their tour that was meant to be this year. That's now been cancelled and is next year. Anyway, next question comes from user333. And I haven't heard from user333 for a while. And it is in response to the Pragmatist or Purist video again I did in October 2020. And user333 says, hello, Music Tech Guy UK. Well, hello, user333. The other thing that doesn't get mentioned in those forums is poor aesthetics of 70s, 80s and dated equipment, particularly in a newly set up home studio. You can have a modern car in the garage, you can have furniture and decorations and bathrooms, but then you drag the studio into the big Jupiter 8 and the old rolling drum machines. They look bad compared to everything else modern that's going on around. It's none of my business what furniture and instruments others want, and I would be happy with a Roland TB303 as it's unobtrusive. But the best approach is to buy the new gear from established manufacturers like Moog. What am I saying? Moog, Korg and Sequential. Avoid clones, analog behavior or ACB. They're similar, but there are major differences to the effect it has on you and your ears. Think of it as what it has on your sensory perception, rather than comparing the readout on a scope video liked. I've had a number of comments on this Pragmatist or Purist video I did. But user333, you bring up a very valid point. In that established houses are still pushing new equipment to the market to meet the needs of the modern musician. It's very true. You know, there are some very, very good keyboards out there from Sequential Circuits, from Korg, from Moog. I have to be honest and say that I really like the Nord Wave 2. I think that is a cracking piece of equipment. I have to be honest. I just can't bring myself to buy anything from Nord. I had such a bad experience with the piece of Nord equipment that it's sort of, you know, I suppose if it came up cheap enough, then I might sort of seriously think about it. But I do like the Nord Wave 2. I think it's a really quite a good concept. But yes, you know, there is new equipment out there, and we shouldn't blinker our eyes to the new equipment because we're so blinded by the clones and the reimaginations. And I think this is where it really becomes personal preference to one or other of your choices, in that, do you want something reimagined to get the old sound, or do you want something brand new to generate a new sound? And I suppose it depends on what you're trying to do. If you like Espen Kraft, for argument's sake, then, you know, he's Mr. 80s, which is probably where I sit. I mean, I love the 80s and I love that sort of sound. So a lot of my keyboard purchases are those sort of keyboards that were very famous around those periods of time. Or keyboard acquisitions, because I don't buy all my keyboards. People do sometimes give me them. All offers greatly received, by the way. Even if they don't work, because that's quite half the fun actually, is actually repairing them. But where was I? Yes. So, we should just sort of, what sort of music you're playing. I mean, you can play 80s music on modern synthesizers. And quite a lot of the modern synthesizers, to be honest, even though they are modern, pay homage to the sounds of the legendary synthesizers. So you kind of be wary of that, and you buy accordingly. But there are some really good synthesizers out there if you want a modern synthesizer. And again, I go back to a comment I made on a previous question, which is all about would you buy an old piece of equipment and hope it sort of worked if it was your livelihood. And again, that will probably play into how you actually work with that piece of equipment. If you're prepared for it to break and you don't mind it breaking. I mean, let's face it, people like Rick Wakeman, for argument's sake. Okay, he has two Mogs that are a part of his keyboard setup. So if you ever see Rick Wakeman in concert, typically you'll have one Mog high there, one Mog high there. But he's probably there's another two Mogs sitting in the background because the Mogs break. Next one comes from XP50 Player. And he writes, have you seen the V80FD prototype from 1989? Even with the SY7799 and everything that came after, the V80FD looks awesome to me. And then there's a link against his question to a edition of Aftertouch. And this is in response to a video I did back in September 2020, which was called Trip to Tokyo 87, which was a showcase of the new DX7 Mark II. Now, first thing is Aftertouch. If you are looking for Yamaha information, Yamaha published a series, or a magazine series called Aftertouch, and pretty much all their sort of up-and-coming releases around this period of time, sort of the late 80s, early 90s, ended up in Aftertouch. Now, I'm not quite sure how many magazine episodes it ran to, but it eventually fizzled out in sort of I think it was sort of mid 90s. It sort of kind of stopped. But there are a couple of resources online that you can go and get all the editions of Aftertouch, and it's actually quite a good read actually for what was going on in the legacy area, and some of the questions and answers are quite good as well. So basically, we're talking about the Yamaha V80FD. And you're probably saying, John, what is the Yamaha V80FD? Well, that's a very good question, because the Yamaha V80FD is Vapor keyboard. And why do I say that? Well, I say that because in 1989, at the NAMM show in 1989, Yamaha revealed this V80FD keyboard. Okay, and it was kind of sort of the next one up from Yamaha. Had the V50 keyboard floating around at the time, and the V80FD was meant to be the sort of the next one on steroids. And then mysteriously dropped the keyboard, and everybody who had placed advanced orders got their money back. And it was a bit of a mystery, and it sort of disappeared into sort of the annals of time as the mystery Yamaha keyboard. Now, there are lots of user groups and that refer to this keyboard and the advanced orders, and many people said, I ordered one of these things and only got my money back. But what was really interesting about this was a number of the core features of the V80FD that were touted, features that were touted to be included in the V80FD, all then appeared in the SY77 and 99. And the SY77 arrived, and I'm trying to think about this, arrived in, was it 90, and the 99 in 91. So, I don't think that I saw a definitive reason why the V80FD was cancelled, but I suspect the 7799 were the reasons why. And I think I've seen a couple of threads that basically said that this keyboard was being developed by a company in the US called Grey Matter, in partnership with Yamaha, and that the partnership between the two companies wasn't particularly rosy for whatever reason. And in parallel, Yamaha were developing the SY77. And I think what they thought was that the 80 would launch, and then the 77 would launch a few years later. And what actually happened was that a number of design problems on the 77 were were solved much quicker than Yamaha thought they were going to solve them. And then they looked at the keyboard launches and decided that rather than launch the V80, they would launch the SY77, and I think the V80 was then dropped. So then, of course, we got the V80, and it seemed, they touted that the V80 was going to be in sort of the mid $250, $2,500 range on launch, and then the SY77 came along and was pretty much bang on in that sort of area as well. So you would have ended up with two keyboards with pretty much similar functionality. And I think probably they decided that that would just cause price confusion and functional confusion, and neither would sell particularly well because nobody would really understand which keyboard they needed to buy. So the V80FD is that fabled keyboard that never appeared but was promoted quite heavily. Now this next one comes from a guy called Pino. I'm assuming he's a guy because I used to know a Pino, and he was Italian as well. And I'm hoping that I've managed to translate this properly, because he wrote to me in Italian, which was very nice, but I don't speak Italian very well. So hopefully I've got this right. Now this was in response to a Korg OASYS video I did way back in 2018 about authorizing the lack of mod engines. Now, so for those of you that don't remember, when I bought my OASYS was effectively reset back to 1.0. The software version was 1.0, and I upgraded it to 1.3.3a, which is currently what it is, and that was the last version of the operating system that was released by Korg. And I also, at the same time, I replaced the battery, I put more memory in it, and I also upgraded all the engines on it. So when Korg stopped supporting the OASYS, they effectively gave away all the additional engines for it for free, as long as you could prove that you owned an OASYS. So I went through in this video, and I went through how to actually authorize the OASYS. Now, one of the things I will talk about in a sec is the fact that Korg have depreciated korguser.net. Anyway, Pino writes, "Hi, I saw your video, but it's not clear. I don't understand some of the steps. I also want to update my OASYS for the latest EX3s, lack STR1 packs, etc. Only in the Japanese site it does not generate the codes. How shall I get these codes? Thanks." And then somebody else in Italian responded actually to him on this, and said that if he went to oasis.korguser.net, he would be able to get them from there, saying after I registered, it does not generate the codes to install the packages. Now, the problem is, and this is only 2 years ago, bearing in mind this is only 2 years ago I managed to acquire the OASYS, but in those 2 years, Korg have depreciated korguser.net. So 2 years ago, when I did all my upgrades, I went to korguser.net and I registered and I got a password. And then what you then did was you then went onto the site and you would give them your machine's public ID, what they call the public ID, and they would generate a security code based on the public ID that you then loaded into your OASYS to authorize the new engines. The problem is the process I kind of described in that video no longer works. and no longer works because that functionality has been pulled out of the website. So if you are an OASYS owner and you don't have all the engines installed on your OASYS, then the easiest thing to do, and I have actually done it, I mean, Korg, in the UK, Korg support are actually very responsive. And I've had a number of conversations with them over email about various bits and bobs, and they've always come up trumps for me, including supplying me with the OS 1.3.3 before 1.3.3a. They were very kind when I ran into problems to actually supply me with an official Korg version of that. So what I would say to anybody, and this is around the world, I don't know what other regions, what Korg support are like in other regions, but in the UK they are very, very helpful. And if you need to install or you want to install these additional engines because you haven't got them, what you need to do is you need to go onto your Korg OASYS, go to the global menu, in the top arrow, click the top arrow, and in the drop down menu that will then appear, it will say public ID. Grab that, click that, and the public ID will be displayed on screen. Copy that public ID down, then go to Korg support and say, I need the license codes generated for these engines. They will then ask you for the public ID, give them the public ID, and they will email you back the license files that you need to load into the... yeah, I think it is. You need to load the license files in. And once you've done that, you'll be up and running. So I apologise to people who've been watching that video and thinking KorgUser.net does not do what it used to do. And that's right, it doesn't do what it's used to do, but I can't control how Korg or any other manufacturer changes their website between when I do the video and when you try to actually execute your piece. So I apologise for that, but that's the process you now need to go through. Go directly to Korg support, and they should be able to help you out.